you all for being here. It's a great pleasure. And I have a few slides, but I also have a planet. And this was by the roadside. I was walking my young son Vishnu to school. He's 8 years old, and we just saw it between two cars, and I thought, what an odd sort of sight, the abandoned world this is. We should take it home and look after it. And I took it home, and it was sitting there listlessly on my bookshelf for a while. I suddenly thought, I know, it wants to come to New York with me. It wants to help me tell the story of the renewal of human rights in a new planetary context. And it is a new context. There are three main things, I think, that characterize this age as planetary in a way that maybe doesn't apply or didn't apply in quite the same way 75 years or so ago when some of the main human rights sort of impetus began, the Declaration of Human Rights and so on. One of them is that we're in a new phase, it appears, of geological time. There has been a very significant, not a small thing, the stable conditions of the climate have actually had a qualitative phase transition. The scientists are still debating it, but to all intents and purposes, we have an Anthropocene, no longer a Holocene. And that matters because with the change in geological time comes necessarily a shift in our way of operating as a species. Second thing that's happened, and on the first, I should say, Bruno Latour puts this very well when he says, we do not understand the stunning extent to which the situation is unprecedented. The idea that we may be destroying our only home as a species has not happened before like this. An awareness that we're doing it, that we appear to be unable to prevent it. We're shocked by it, stuck by it, confused by it, and yet there it is. The stunning extent to which the situation is unprecedented, an awareness of the planet as our only home that we appear to be in the process of destroying. The second thing that's happened, it was highlighted by Maria Ressa, the Nobel Prize-winning journalist. She says in the context of social media, particularly now sort of turbocharged by AI and algorithmic logic, that an invisible atom bomb has exploded inside our information system. An invisible atom bomb has exploded inside our information system. And she speaks there of the need to create new institutions to deal with this explosion. When you think of the planet, the connections were always there in postcards and maps, but now we have instantaneous communication across all of this. And the third thing that's happened is this world, this system has a kind of operating system known as capitalism. And capitalism applies in virtually all, if not all, parts of the world. And there are, I won't give a long critique of capitalism today, but one of the more pithy definite descriptions of what's going on is by Paul Mason. He says that capitalism can be thought of as a complex adaptive system that has lost its ability to adapt. We're now faced with a world of a new phase of geological time, an entirely new information system we haven't caught up with, and an economic and political economic system that appears to be unable to change in the way it has to change just to keep life on Earth functional, to have a viable habitat. That's all very well, but then I realized something paradoxical. I'd taken home a planet, but in a weird way, it was going home. It's the home within the home. We are actually on this planet. And this was talks called The Inner Life of the Future. I want you just to take a second to tap into your inner life, because some people are skeptical. I've said inner life before. People are like, what's that? But you have consciousness. And I believe that we have to make consciousness relevant. So I want you just to begin for a second, just either close your eyes or don't, but notice that you have the choice, that you have the freedom in this moment to be in your interiority. I can close my eyes or not. Then I want you to think of the miracle of your eyesight looking at the stage, or not. And I want you to think of the wonder of your ears that can hear these words. And I want you to situate yourself in New York Law School, in this beautiful room. But then just remember where you are, roughly here. And if your mind isn't a little bit blown by that, it should be, because it's the kind of reckoning we need. There has been a seismic shift. César quite wisely cautioned against endings, but there's certainly major changes underway, very major ones. And that's the context in which I want you to, first of all, listen to these questions about human rights and how we should understand them. I know Cesar for many reasons, but one of them was I became an Open Society Fellow in 2017. And my main output for that, published in 2020, was an open letter called Dear Human Rights Movement. And in there, I go through the process of becoming almost like an anthropologist, becoming aware of this tribe, because I wasn't part of it. But I came to know it and even love it, with all the sort of longing and pain that's wrapped up in love. But as I was doing it, I noticed a certain innocent naivety in some quarters of the movement. And I kept on asking myself, if human rights is the answer that they keep on evoking, what is the question? If human rights is the answer, what is the question? And with this group, I want you to imagine now that you're, let's say, a pre-tragic liberal. And by that, or bleeding heart liberal. I want you to imagine there's the caricature of someone who believes there is no problem, human rights morality is a given, human rights politics is always good, human rights law always works. In that context, the questions are something like this. If human rights is the answer, how do we speak on behalf of humanity? Oops, sorry, 1 second. That's the next set of questions. Excuse me. How can we ensure dignity for all human beings? How can we protect people from their political leaders? We are born without asking for it. What are we entitled to? If there are universal moral principles, how do we spread and uphold them? How might the rule of law be used as a vehicle for inclusion and emancipation? How can we protect minorities from majoritarian whims? How do we give institutional expression to the idea of citizenship? And how do we establish institutional touchstones to support vibrant civil societies? Now, these are good questions. They're still valid, they're still real, but they're not the whole story. And any renewal of human rights will have to move beyond them. Something has happened. The liberal order has basically collapsed. Now, collapse is not the same as ending, Cesar, but collapse is a kind of beginning to break down. I don't say the liberal order is not here. The very conversation is testament to the fact that it hasn't broken down. But there is a collapse underway, and it has been underway for about 2 decades now. I am one of Fukuyama's children, in the sense that I am one of these people who believed the world was always going to get better, that democracies were stable, the free market was benign, and the world would continue to realize this. I don't think that anymore. And I think we might be a suicidal civilization, unable to escape its own delusion. And yet, here we are, and we have to try. So with liberal collapse in mind, I want you to consider a different set of questions, and this time from a different kind of person. I'm going to take my scarf off just to kind of emphasize that this is not the same person speaking. Now you can think of me as a plutocrat, maybe Putin, maybe a fossil fuel baron, maybe a financier. But I want to, a bad financier, there are good ones, of course. I want to, the same question, if human rights is the answer, what is the question? How do we speak on behalf of humanity to punish those we disagree with? How do we institute global laws to spread a particular form of democracy that defers to the presumed wisdom of the market? Is there a way to create an institutional framework that looks like it helps to clean up the social and ecological collateral damage of capitalism, but without actually getting in its way? What kind of ideological vehicle could support the affluent West in claiming the legitimate use of force on the world stage? Could we create a valued mechanism premised on the importance of performative shame and outrage that was ineffective at addressing the root causes of problems? If we wanted to create an apparently axiomatic and shared set of moral touchstones that would never be fully accepted because they are historically and culturally specific, how would we do it? Is there a way to alienate particular individuals in particular places by suggesting that an idealized abstract citizen is in principle more important than them? Now, you may think these questions are not very fair or kind, but they are questions that are asked. And the difference between them, I would put to you, is something about the way we hold the relationship between human rights law, human rights politics, and human rights morality. If you're broadly a human rights believer, in the secular religion as it's sometimes called, these 3 things will seem aligned and uncomplicated, unproblematic. But there are many scholars, like Chetan Bhatt comes to mind, Wendy Brown comes to mind, who speak about human rights as a blueprint for governance, just as a mechanism, a procedure, a protocol by which we organize society. And in that context, if you have the human rights law and human rights politics, but you don't have the human rights morality, you get questions a bit like this one. So what kind of context are we really in then? How can we sort of sum up the situation with planetization, the collapse of the liberal order, and so on? I suggest we're in what I call in my work a metacrisis. Now, some will love this term, some will hate it. I've grown to have a very complex relationship to it, kind of love-hate. But it's worth thinking about the specific terms here, because I've taken quite a while to define it like this. It's the historically specific threat to truth, beauty, and goodness caused by our persistent misunderstanding, misvaluing, and misappropriating of reality. The metacrisis is the crisis within and between all the world's major crises, a root cause that is at once singular and plural, a multifaceted delusion arising from the spiritual and material exhaustion of modernity that permeates the world's interrelated challenges and manifests institutionally and culturally to the detriment of life on Earth. Now, is it really that bad? Well, I think so. I do believe that when you look deeply into the planetary context and human beings doing their best to govern it, you can find something like delusion there. And it's a multifaceted delusion. It's manifest in the idea of indefinite growth on a finite planet, which for many is the only legitimate mandate that will win you an election in a democratic system that we value. We don't have the means of actually fundamentally transforming the basis within the existing institutional framework. None of this is easy. As I say, I believe a key question for the next few days is to distinguish between human rights morality, human rights law, and human rights politics. And when you begin to do that, a much more complex picture arises. The third set of questions I want to lead you with are the world in metacrisis. They're questions which arise from a very, very particular kind of historical situation. And I believe these are the questions that the human rights movement has to move towards answering. They're much tougher. My wife Shiva said she didn't like them. She thought they were a bit verbose. But that's okay. I decided to keep them, and I think they're necessary. In a world increasingly defined by transnational forces of ecology, technology, and finance, how might existing forms of governance premised on sovereign nation states ever be fit for purpose? In a world where the law is often broken with impunity, without shame, how should we seek to renew faith in the rule of law at scale, assuming that we should? In a world where democratic processes are used to consolidate plutocratic power, what do we want government of the people, for the people, and by the people to actually mean? In a world of data-driven surveillance and psychographic manipulation, is it credible to think that the people know their own minds and really act in their own interests? In a world of filter bubbles, disinformation campaigns, and the loss of epistemic shame, is it feasible to reclaim a public realm that's grounded in shared intelligibility? In a world of cascading ecological breakdowns caused by human behavior shaped by a tenacious economic model, where should we focus our attention? And in a world of planetary scale trolley problems, where billions may soon watch millions die, and all available options necessitate a breach of principle. Arguably, we see this today in the news. How can we help 8 billion people, internalize the conception of human dignity? The human rights movement can't yet answer the third set of questions. It's not institutionally or culturally equipped to do so. But I believe that's part of the renewal that Cesar's initiative, the initiative here at NYU is trying to get to. It's a kind of software update. It's like thinking differently and deeply about a different set of problems. And the essence of it is that we need more of the human in human rights. There isn't really enough of the interiority that I mentioned earlier. Now, back to the planet for a second, you'll notice something peculiar about it. Normally when you see these globes, they have a lovely sort of spine that allows you to turn. And you may also know something curious, that the Earth, the reason we have seasons is when the Earth goes around the sun, it doesn't just go spin, it also tilts on its own axis. But this Earth, unfortunately, doesn't have an axis. And that's not a small thing, because some believe that we're in a new axial age. The axial age, for those who haven't heard of it, is a mostly theological term, sometimes archaeological term, refers to a period of time about 2,500 years ago, give or take, a few hundred years, where there was a transformation in consciousness. Mythos became logos. The individual was born. Figures like Buddha and Confucius and the many Greek philosophers came into being. There was systematic thought. Rationality was born. There was a genuine shift in consciousness. So although it sounds rhetorical, maybe a little woo, transformation of consciousness is possible, and it's necessary when the world reaches a certain state of pressure and intensity and contradiction, which is arguably what's happening now, as modernity is not ending, Cesar, but it is mutating. Modernity seems to be epochally losing its way. We need more of the human in human rights, which means reaching inwardly over the next few days. The kind of work we have to do includes this kind of search for a different way of being, less reliant on reason, less reliant on logic, and yet not throwing those things out, beyond those things, not beneath them or instead of them. And if I could sum that up, I would say we need a moment like 1948, but very, very different. Because I don't know if it's going to cut it to do it through nation states. I don't know if it's going to be all of the 200 or so countries coming together and agreeing on a prospectus for the future. Of course not. Any realist analysis will say there are competing interests and objectives and values at play. The human rights morality that we believe in might be very, very strong and permeating, but it's not simple to understand, nor is it universal. There will be contestation. And maybe it's not for states to decide. Maybe our hope lies in something more like global civil society. Maybe we need to place our hope in polycentric governance, multiple different forms of intervention in which we communicate each other and find our hope by building alliances transnationally. That, for me personally, is where I see my hope. A world that's something more like, this is a world of some decades now, but it's good to sort of think about where we're going. A world that's less about the nation state and more about the bioregion, actually reconnecting with nature fundamentally, giving rise to different forms of polities and governance structures. It's cosmolocal in the sense that there's always a local context and niche that we have to attend to, real people suffering, problems to be solved. But the wonder of the internet is that you now have this global community that's sharing in the practice, often helping to support and develop your ideas in other parts of the world. And all of this will be possible if we actually have a reckoning that's commensurate with the challenges of our time, which I don't think we're yet doing. The world has utterly changed. This one precious planet is in deep peril. And while groups like this, initiatives like this, cannot solve those problems alone, it is imperative to live and to feel the blessing of a life where you're alive and able and willing to do something about these seismic problems. And I think it's possible for all of us to do it. I'm going to leave you just with 3 quick questions of how I see the major questions that I think we need to focus on. I think once you realize that this underlying multifaceted delusion is there, there's a kind of educational imperative. We actually need the human rights, through the work of people like Amartya Sen and Martha Nussbaum, we know that rights and capabilities are very closely tied. And what it means to grow in capability to meet the challenges of our time is, I think, an imperative for the human rights movement, to reorient somewhat toward less legalistic. Someone in my research said that the movement had been colonized by technocrats. And I think what she was looking for was some deeper engagement with the more sort of emancipatory, humanizing side of it, which is often educative at its heart. It's about moving the human rights movement to become a kind of human capability movement. And part of that is helping a kind of education, a way of understanding the world that has a conception of peace at its heart. Because if you look to the future, there are all sorts of reasons why the world might converge on World War III. Most scenarios in my analysis seem to lead that way, but not all of them. But we don't seem to have a notion, a theory and practice of peace worthy of the challenges of our time. And it's up to the human rights movement, I believe, the human rights ecosystem, as Cesar puts it, to begin to think more deeply, if we want peace, how do we create it? Richard Rorty said, for example, you're trying to build a system based on moral equality without social solidarity. Where does the social solidarity come from? Does it always depend on the political economy, or are there other means, cultural means and so on, to build it? But we need an orientation towards transformative education, a deeper conception of peace, and we need a reckoning commensurate in spirit, though not in content, to 1948. And it's wonderful to be here to think that we might begin to start that kind of process with you all. And I'm deeply grateful to Cesar for inviting me, and look forward to talking to you all over the next few days. Thanks very much.